This week, Donelson in the West.
And what's this?
East. This week, Fort Johnston in the West.
And what's this in North Carolina?
On the 7th, the Battle of Roanoke Island, North Carolina. Brigadier General Burnside has been tasked with tightening the blockade in the east. The Confederate fortifications on Roanoke Island have prevented him from doing so. Manning the three separate forts is 3,000 men of the Weiss Legion, named after Brigadier General Henry Weiss, who is sick. So instead, Colonel Henry Shaw will be leading the Confederates against the Union's 10,000 men under Brigadier General Ambrose Burnside. Each side has a sizable fleet. Shaw has 8 ships. Technically 9, but the USS Appomattox won't arrive for the battle. Burnside's fleet of 29 vessels, though, obviously outclasses and outnumbers the Confederate fleet. Burnside and his men board their vessels and travel to Roanoke Island on the 5th, and on the 6th, a storm. They have to wait till the 7th, but on the morning of the 7th, the rain stops, and the Union's mission can commence. They first go to the landing points and fire on the defenders at these points to test the capabilities. No response, therefore no artillery. The fleet then splits up, half going on to attack the forts at Pike Point, the other go to attack the Confederate fleet, also known as the Mosquito Fleet. They don't disembark. At midday, the main battle commences. The fort at Pike Point is pounded. It only return fire with 4 guns. The Mosquito Fleet can't do any damage, and when one of the Mosquito Fleet's ships suffer a hole to the hull and then runs aground to save the crew, they block another of the forts on Roanoke Island. All other forts, though, that were thought to be in range, actually aren't. Some Union ships are hit, but no real damage is done, and the rest of the Mosquito Fleet withdraws to resupply to fight for another day. At 3, the Union lands its men, and all of its men, 10,000, are on the beach by midnight, along with artillery. The defenders of the beach actually had no artillery, and only numbered 200, so they fled before a real fight could break out. That's the end of the 7th, 10,000 men sleeping on a beach. On the 8th, the Union wakes up and the battle resumes. They advance along a narrow path, flanked by impenetrable swamps, and after a while are halted by 400 Confederates. Despite the fact another 1,000 Confederates are right behind them, Colonel Shaw only deploys 400 men due to the narrow path and impenetrable swamps. For 2 hours, the small force of 400 fought on the 25th Massachusetts, the Union regiment at the very front of the line. Both sides fire so quickly and inaccurately that the smoke hampers their ability to fire even more accurately. Neither side suffers or deals many casualties, but both are soon exhausted. After the 2 hours, the 10th Connecticut replaces the 25th Massachusetts, but the Union still can't advance. But then, a 2nd Brigade reaches up, decides to screw those impenetrable swamps, and sends regiments through the swamps. Because they were supposed to be impenetrable, Shaw didn't bother protecting his flanks, so when the Union attacks on 3 sides, he is done for. He hadn't set up a line of withdrawal, so he only can surrender. Burnside loses 37 men, 214 wounded, and 13 missing. Shaw surrenders 2,500 men, 30 guns. He loses 23 dead, 58 wounded, and 62 missing. This is a complete destruction of the Confederate forces on the island. All that remains is the fleet. On the 9th, full General Albert Sidney Johnston orders Brigadier General Gideon Pillow to reinforce Fort Donelson, and Pillow is now in control of the fort. Then Brigadier General John Floyd is ordered to Fort Donelson, and Floyd is now in control of the fort. On the 10th, a new Dutch government is sworn in. They're led by John Thorbecke, an anti-interventionist. The Dutch are not a real threat to the U.S., but they could come in economically. The Dutch colonies in the East Indies provide tin and other cash crops, though not cotton. And the Dutch mainland is filled with railroads, which are proving to be very useful in this conflict. Maybe some advisors from the Netherlands could prove useful to the Union or Confederate war efforts. But Also on the 10th, probably way more important, a naval battle between 13 gunships of the Union and the Mosquito fleet. 13 gunships, because while no gunships of the Union suffered greatly, there was no reason to risk expending the minor hits that the gunships took. Captain Lynch of the Confederacy knows this is it. He tells leaders of each ship to not let themselves fall into enemy's hands. They will die, but they will sow their lives dearly. The Confederacy is 5 gunships, a battery, and a schooner. Notice this isn't the entire Mosquito fleet. 2 ships are currently being repaired. So the stage is set. All Lynch needs to do is make sure that his ships stay near the battery. Wait, the battery only has 4 guns and is half manned? With only 8 people manning it, Lynch knows it's not going to be very useful. He switched the crew of one of his ships to fully strengthen the 4-gun battery. By fully strengthening this Titan, what? Only 3 of them are actually useful? Okay, but as the ships near, the Confederates know the battery will do very important damage. And the Union ships passed right by them? Okay, but the Confederate schooner will surely put up a challenge, and it's on fire. Union gunboats concentrate their gunfire, destroying the enemy ships one by one. The attack happened so quickly that the Union ships actually board and capture an enemy vessel. 2 Confederate ships try to escape, and one is too big to go down the river. It is set on fire. The other makes it out. Wait, another ship is making a run? And nope, that it is sunk. It's a crushing victory for the Union. They lose 2 men, 7 wounded. While sinking or forcing the enemy to destroy 4 of their ships, capture 1 of them, inflict 5 dead, 7 wounded, and 34 captured. The Union Navy reigned supreme on this day. And on the 11th, politics. The USMR, or U.S. Military Railroad, is created. Lincoln has the authority to seize any railroad or telegraph lines after an act of Congress in January 1862. The USMR is set up to do just that. Now there is a problem. The USMR doesn't want to seize northern property, even though it may be useful to the war effort. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton is worried about how seizing of property might look, especially after Lincoln has been called a tyrant. And also, how politicians would react to it. These railways and their owners are huge donors. So he's waiting for Southern rails to be captured before he can push the USSR into high gear. Also on the 11th, let's go back to USS Grant. He was supposed to take Fort Johnston by the 8th, but the weather kind of screwed him over. Heavy rain postpones him to the 11th. But the night of the 11th, he tells his counts of war. They will advance. He gets a little bit of pushback from Brigadier General McClernand, but the 12th, the flotilla is moving towards Donelson, and the infantry is moving towards Donelson. The weather is actually pretty good on the 12th, so while he might not have been able to take the fort by the 8th, Grant still has pretty good reason to be happy. He moves unopposed, but then, as he reaches the outskirts of Fort Donelson, he is stopped by some Confederate cavalry under Nathan Bedford Forrest, a colonel who's not very well known. On sight, the cavalry runs away, and by the night of the 12th, he sets up his forces outside of Fort Donelson and the Confederate bulwarks outside of them. On the 13th, he tells his men to test the enemy, but not fully engage. That does not go well. The test almost becomes a full-blown battle. And also on the 11th, back to Grant's advance from last week. He told his men that they were going to be moving. Weather be damned. He actually gets a little bit of pushback from Brigadier General McClernand, but on the 12th, he moves. The flotilla moves, the infantry moves. Weather is actually very good, and despite not being able to take Fort Johnston by the 8th like he had reported to Halleck, Grant has good reason to be happy. For most of it, Grant moves unopposed, but then they come across some Confederate cavalry under Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest, I believe. He's not very well known. But upon seeing the Union, the cavalry withdraws. On the night of the 12th, Grant has laid siege. Surprisingly, Grant's infantry actually arrives before the gunboats. On the 13th, the Union tests the Confederate strength. Well, they're supposed to. Both Brigadier General Smith and Brigadier General McClernand do more than just test the Confederates. And a ship is actually ripped into by Confederate artillery, but a full battle is avoided. Siege will continue next week. Thank God I did not want to read out another order of battle this week. Then, there's the showdown at the Capitol. Wyckoff is under serious charges, by extension, Mrs. Lincoln. And on inquiry by the committee, Wyckoff messes up immediately. He says he got the speech from a source, but when asked who the source was, he refuses to answer. He technically perjured himself, so Wyckoff is arrested, and Sickles needs to work his magic to fix this terrible situation. When Sickles gets called before the committee, he tells them he doesn't know who the source is, but they might want to call the White House gardener. He has worked with the gardener to come up with a way where he will take the blame and Miss Lincoln will come off not looking the best, but not being terrible. Problem is, the gardener is a terrible liar. He tells the committee that he memorized the entire speech and told it to Wyckoff word by word, when he could have just taken the physical speech. Now, Mr. Lincoln has to kind of step in, and the president just asks the committee to please stop. It's hurting the strength of the federal government. And they relent. But there's so many loose ties, and the public want a villain. So, Sickles digs around, and it turns out the gardener has Southern sympathies. Sickles takes these and blackmails the gardener. Either go before the committee and to jail, or join the Union Army. Like that, the Union has one more volunteer. Now, coming out of this, it has pretty major consequences. Wyckoff is out. He has embarrassed the White House. But do you want to know who saved the White House? Sickles. He has now strengthened his friendship with both Mrs. Lincoln and President Lincoln. And third, he kind of angered the entire Senate. They don't think he respects their authority. And they also feel like he broke the law, which, So, what will come of this? Well, we have to wait till next week. That's where the week ends. A huge victory in North Carolina, a siege in Tennessee, and changes in Washington. The USMR strengthens the White House, and by extension, the Union. The Army of the Potomac stays in D.C., not fighting at all. That doesn't change the fact major actions are happening. Western theater does exist, and it does matter. Donelson falling can threaten Confederate supply lines, open up major cities to the Union Army. The fights in North Carolina do exist and do matter. The blockade of the Confederacy has tightened, and the Union Army has basically created a new front line in North Carolina. If there was ever a week to remind us of the intensity, scope, and mass death of the war, it's this one. Hello, it's the entire Civil War week by week team here. That is a weird motto to have. And I want a new outro. So, if you liked the video, please like it. If you want to see more, you should be seeing suggested videos right about now. And if you want to know what happens next week, please subscribe. And if you want to share history, give me suggestions in a more easy way than YouTube comments, or want to tell me how wrong I am, please check out the channel's Discord.